No checklist completed is going to save you. No bucket list is going to save you. No amount of blood, sweat, and tears that you poured out in your life is going to save you. No amount of cash or worldly possessions is going to save you. You can't take it with you. You'll be dead. Buddha can't save you. Gandhi can't enlighten you. The Pope can't absolve your sins. The saints can't pray you into eternal life. Muhammad can't fix you. Allah isn't able. No president, no legislation, no Supreme Court justice, no state or nation or leader or celebrity. No one can save you because there is salvation in no one else.
Nobody but Jesus. Okay, everybody, so here we go with another brief episode here. Well, I say brief. I actually don't have a lot of time, so it's going to have to be fairly brief anyway. Episode of the Bearded Bible Thinker. I'm actually, this month, if you haven't noticed, we did not have an episode that came out on the 1st of April. Maybe there's my April Fool's joke. You expected an episode and it didn't happen. So April Fool's, we recorded most, at least, of the episode that we wanted to do, and that ended up it didn't really leave me with a lot of time to do any editing and stuff. So that will be coming out. Marshall and Tanner and I focused on controversial theology this go around. So that's what the idea was when we were dealing with it. Controversial theology. So that's the thing to expect to come out. We did. So we talked through the doctrines of grace. So that would be like the Calvinism versus Arminianism fight that typically happens. We talked about, we didn't get to cessationism versus continuationism. That would be the thing that we didn't have time. We ran out of time in recording, so we didn't even talk about that. But I'll talk about that this month, or we'll talk about that this month, depending on what happens. We talked about complementarianism and egalitarianism. So that would be questions having to do with like women in ministry. What are the roles of men and women? So female pastors, that sort of stuff that pops up. We talked about covenant theology. We talked very briefly about eschatology. So the episode that we recorded was really meant to just scratch the surface of some of these things. Hopefully in time to come, I'll dig a little bit more into these subject matters and be posting things about that as well. But I think it's important to talk about controversial theology because it's controversial, not just for clicks and likes and all those things, but it's controversial for a reason, right? I think there are a lot of folks in the Christian community that are flabbergasted by some of these things. There are lots of mischaracterizations that happen. There is often a lot of even name calling and frustrating things like that. There's a lot of when I say mischaracterization, I mean misrepresentation of the views, right? So, for instance, I very rarely have heard a postmillennial person accurately describe what a premillennial person would describe their view as. I've never heard a premillennial dispensational kind of person accurately depict what a postmillennial person or an amillennial person would actually believe. You run into the same description when it comes to all of these things, right? You're very rarely going to hear an Arminian describe to you accurately what a Calvinist or someone who believes these doctrines of grace would believe, and vice versa, for that matter. We're not super good at giving one another the benefit of the doubt theologically in the church, and so that's the reason, right? There's a lot of confusion, and I think it's very significant that you have folks in the church that So it's really significant that in Paul's letters, for instance, there are lots of Paul's letters, particularly places like 1 Corinthians, where, I mean, you just read that book. There are all sorts of problems and despicable things going on amongst the people who claim to be Christians in the Corinthian church. Galatians is another one. Galatians, he spends a decent portion of that book saying, essentially saying, "You idiots." And yet he addresses these letters to churches that are just filled with issues that we would look at someone and be like, "Woof, church discipline." And I'm not saying that we shouldn't do church discipline on some of these things, but what I am saying is that we have to, as Christians, be better at not jumping the gun or jumping to conclusions or jumping on people and saying, well, that person believes this, so they're automatically not a Christian, right? Or that person believes this, so now I don't even want to engage, or we're not even going to talk about this because this person is clearly not a Christian. No, there were people committing sexual immorality. There were people doing all sorts of stuff in many of these churches that Paul addressed, and he addressed them as to the saints who are in such and such, right? A place. So he's addressing people who are very clearly Christians in his mind, and he's addressing them about things that we would typically jump down someone's throat about. So I think that we need to get better about that, right? It does not mean that we need to sacrifice truth for the sake of unity. I talk about that plenty. So don't hear me saying that we need to just set all these differences aside. Of course, we don't need to set all these differences aside. They're differences because we care about truth as Christians, right? So anyway, this particular episode, I've been planning to do this for a long time. In fact, the first, you'll see in a second, the first thing that I set aside September 26th of last year. So I've been meaning to do this as a semi-regular kind of thing for a long time. So I'm on X, formerly known as Twitter. At some point, we have to stop saying formerly known as Twitter and just call it X. But so I'm on X, and every once in a while there's a tweet or something, there's a post that I want to interact with, and so I bookmark it with every intention to interact with it. And the idea is I want to get like a few of those together and then have episodes where I just interact and walk through some of these things that I've bookmarked. And that's that. Like, that's the whole deal. So I'm going to do that today. There's several what I think are good things to be interacting with, and just talk through, some of which I have completely forgotten why I was going to interact with these. There is a short video that I forget even what it's about, but at the time I saw it and I was like, it would be kind of a neat deal to interact with this. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to have to do it quickly for each of these. And then I also want to leave that with a brief discussion about an email that I received from the North Dakota Family Alliance, which, lots of good, we'll see in a little bit, I'll show you, but lots of good stuff from them. They are typically super sound. And I think one of these subject matters that's misunderstood often is stances on not necessarily abortion, but what to do about abortion. Okay? So this is something that we're going to have to, that we'll talk through. Right? I just got a notification and got distracted. Sorry. So I'm going to scoot on over here in just a moment to the other screen, and then we will yeah, hopefully we'll. I'm gonna jump to this other screen, and we're gonna get to this Twitter deal here. Well, it's supposed to work like that. Hang on. Sorry, folks. Give me a second. There we go. All right. So hopefully you can see that. Here's the first. Ooh, the Cessationist Conference. That's going to get some fighting stuff going on. Give me 1 second. Okay, so let's talk about this. The Cessationist Conference. So here, this is actually what I wanted to talk about. This is a post from Justin Peters, and why I wanted to talk about it is something that I was already talking about. There's some mischaracterization kind of stuff that goes on, and let's see here. There we go. Here we go. Okay. So Justin Peters says, so Julie Royce, I'm not going to get into a lot of her. You can look her up if you want. She takes a lot of heat, and some of it for good reason. She jumps to a lot of conclusions at times and assumes motive at times. Some of the stuff that she posted something on Mark Driscoll earlier today that I'm like, yep, spot on. So it's not all bad. You just have to weigh it, right? She says in a tweet a long time ago, I just can't imagine getting this excited about a doctrine that God won't intervene miraculously. I also can't imagine having the audacity to assert this interpretation with this kind of authority. I would never want to say God won't do something he's repeatedly done in the past. So this cessationist conference has taken a lot of heat coming up. It's a G3 conference that's going to be coming up. I actually, I'm not going to get into cessationism. That's not the point of this. The point is the mischaracterization thing, that doctrine that God won't intervene miraculously. I, along with Justin Peters, that's why I pointed this out, I've never legitimately, this is either complete and utter ignorance on the part of Julie Royce, or it is intentional fabrication on her part to make a point. I've never met even one cessationist that claims that God won't intervene miraculously. That's actually stupid. No cessationist believes that. So I'm going to assume, for the sake of, I guess for the sake of grace, that it is ignorance, that she just hasn't read up on it or something. But what cessationists do not believe is that God won't intervene miraculously. All cessationists believe in the miraculous, even today. All cessationists would say that miracles do happen, that healing, that God still heals people, but that God doesn't have healers, if that makes sense. So that's the difference, right? You pray for someone, they get healed. God does that all the time. But what a cessationist would say specifically about healing is that even though we do that, and every cessationist engages in praying for the sick and in hopes that God will not only hear those prayers, but answer those prayers to the affirmative. But what a cessationist does not say is that there are healers today. Like I'm not going to walk into a room and say, in the name of Jesus, be healed, with the expectation that someone is going to get up and walk who hasn't been able to walk. So that's what a cessationist would say. So it's a mischaracterization. It's one of those things I was talking about earlier. Peters says Julie Royce thinks cessationism is the audacity, quote, to believe that God quote, won't intervene miraculously. She, like so many, criticizes that which she cannot even properly define. And that's really the kicker, right? I mean, we run into this with eschatology, with all sorts of theological stances, that honestly, if we were to all be able to accurately understand and define what the other believes, certainly we would still have differences, because we're always going to be attempting to sort out the truth. But we would be actually a lot closer, I think, in a lot of areas than we than we believe that we are. He says, I'm a cessationist. Most of my friends are cessationists. I literally know of no cessationist who believes God does not still do miracles. Not one. So I agree with that. I don't see that either. Let's see, what else? What else did I do here? Okay, I'm not going to even do that. The videos I'm going to leave out because I'm going to run out of time. So Protestia, I actually don't really know why they're doing a little like, I don't get it. But other than I do so Bethel music, notoriously heretical. There's a lot of music that they put out that's not heretical, but the doctrines that they teach that Bethel espouses are heretical. Some of them. They teach a false gospel in some ways. And this really isn't even up for debate. It's just biblically, it's just a true statement. Bill Johnson is one of the premier false teachers in our world, at least in our culture today. And so I might have highlighted this. So actually, a lot of people are fighting about the cessationist conference costing so much, but it actually isn't even sort of comparable to this $600 ticket or over $700 ticket for Worship School 2024. To be fair, the 10th through the 19th is a longer thing, but I would struggle to work with these people. I don't know who all of them are, but Martin Smith, Natalie Grant, Jackie Hill Perry, at best, this is a real lack of discernment to pair up with Bethel to do literally anything. There are scriptures that essentially tell us not to associate with folks like that. And I think that sometimes this gets pulled and blown way out of proportion in our world where Christians won't associate with anyone. And man, if you're caught in a picture in 2010 with someone, oh my gosh, well, you're ruined, right? Like stay away from that guy. But I think that's just dumb when that happens, because you don't know the circumstances. You don't know the situation. It could be absolutely true. If I were in a picture and TD Jakes were in a picture, could be true that I am in some ways disqualifying myself because I'm associating with him. I'm brother hugging him like we're pals. I go to him for advice. But all of those things are the assumptions that people make automatically without digging into it, without looking into it, without doing any kind of benefit of the doubt stuff. So that can be really, it's a really bad part of Christian culture right now. However, to be a part of this Worship School 2024 with Bethel, the main speaker, I'm sure, or the main attraction will be Bill Johnson and Bethel Music. Bethel is putting it on. And so for me, engaging in this at all is a lack of discernment, especially for this Martin Smith. I don't know who that is. Nathan Finocchio. I'm sorry if I butchered your name. Natalie Grant, Jackie Hill Perry. These folks had to get an invite. They had to weigh the options. They had to get what the purpose is, what are they being asked to do, and they had to say yes. And not one of them should have said yes. So that's a bad deal. I'm not going to tell you that everything that any of these folks have ever done that are associating themselves with Bethel here is bad. But I will say that this at least shows an incredible lack of discernment. And so at that point, you have to go, okay, well, what else do I need to watch out for, right? I think that's a fair thing to do after this. So next, Virgil Walker, my man. The top 5 most followed Twitter accounts among Christians are, this is from January 8th, Joel Osteen, Joyce Meyer, let's talk about the number too. Joel Osteen, 10.1 million. Joyce Meyer, 6.3 million followers. Bishop Jakes, so TD Jakes, 4.5 million followers. Franklin Graham, 2.9 million followers. And Rick Warren, 2.2 million followers. The only one of those names that I think has any weight at all, theologically and ministerially, is Franklin Graham. And I don't know a ton about him. Frankly, I just know from an organizational standpoint, what their organization does is pretty legit. But literally every one of these other names are either false teachers or that would be these 3, Osteen, Joyce Meyer, and T.D. Jakes, or Rick Warren. I would say probably theologically isn't a false teacher necessarily till maybe recently with some of his complementarian, running away from complementarianism based on some scriptures that are laughable and taken out of context. I mean, that just shows that he has no idea what he's doing exegetically. But that's a bad deal, that many followers for those particular people. That's not a good thing. So, okay, what else? It shows I think a lack of discernment amongst Christians. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to rewind this because I do not remember what this says. It's part of Woke Preacher Clips. Okay, so Woke Preacher Clips is they do. Let's see here. I'm going to turn this down a bit because that sounded loud. Woke Preacher Clips is just what it sounds like. This is posted by Daryl Harrison. I really like him a lot. Got to meet him at G3 last year. Daryl and Virgil Walker do the Just Thinking podcast. It's super good. If you haven't taken it in, take it in. It's well worth your time. He says, a few days ago, I commented that the political left would unequivocally tolerate the literal destruction of America as a nation so long as they can keep abortion legal. Reverend William Barber, Reverend is in quotes. I actually enjoy that Reverend is in quotes because I think so many people like Reverend Al Sharpton and Reverend this person and that person. It really, calling them that very much demeans the issue. It demeans the title. It makes it meaningless. Anyway, Reverend William Barber is an example of that mindset. Like Barber, there are many men and women today. ... Okay, so let's see what the post is. So Woke Preacher Clip says Rob Reiner or Rainier says that the God Plus Country movie closes with a touching monologue from Reverend William Barber on reforming the church in America to come back to Jesus' teachings. Yes, this William Barber. Okay, so I'm not gonna. I don't know who Rob Rainier is or anything like that. I'm just gonna interact maybe with this video. I don't remember what it is again. So here we go. We'll just interact with this real quick.
We need everybody to get a ballot, fill out a ballot, cast a ballot. We must have the most moral, massive, progressive vote out, turnout ever in the history of the United States.
Actually, I think that's what he said necessarily isn't illegal, but I know maybe it's state by state, but I know that in North Dakota we can actually lose our what is it? We can lose our. You can get in trouble as a church for publicly from the pulpit. If I were to say, "Hey, vote for this person," we could lose our tax exempt status as a nonprofit. Not that, frankly, at someday that's going to happen anyway, I'm sure. So, I mean, I don't care that much, but it's like, that's actually, he's borderline doing some illegal junk here, depending on what's going on. But so there's a whole bunch of rainbow stuff in the crowd, it looks like, and people.
That benefits from this massive turnout. Don't play with us this time. If we put you in, you better make abortion rights a national law.
Okay, that's coming from a so-called reverend. So that's why the name is really close to meaningless at this point. That's a complete joke. You better make abortion rights illegal. He should take that cross off his neck before it melts when he's in hell. I hope that he repents and comes to Christ. Let's see. Lecrae shares why. Oh, I remember this. Lecrae shares why he deserves reparations. What do you think? So let's listen to this.
There's been no compensation for what our family has endured. You know what I'm saying? So I always think about that.
Black people shouldn't pay taxes. That's my first easy reparation.
Hey, that's a good reparation.
Or return
Easy. They shouldn't have to pay taxes. Yeah.
I'm with that.
Easy.
I'm with that.
Okay, so this conversation is obviously about reparations for chattel slavery that took place in America. And, I think any attempt by, especially me, I'm a white dude, it's the worst I'm the worst kind of person in all of existence. Christian, white guy, right? The beard probably doesn't help. But so anytime I'm going to address this, there's a huge demographic that's just going to be like, oh, white guy talking about this, so let's just skip it. And that's fine. It is what it is. But the idea of reparations is what they're talking about. And first of all, there's a premise that has already been brought up that's laughably ignorant. All people who have dark skin tone are not descended from slaves, first of all. So you can't just blanket say all black people should not have to pay taxes as reparation. That doesn't even make sense. And frankly, there were also black slave owners at the time. That was a thing. No time to talk about percentages of all of that stuff, but that was definitely a thing. Thirdly, these situations, they were sold into slavery in the first place by African tribes, rival tribes, and things like that. So this goes beyond the color of someone's skin. And so I think that just saying a blanket statement like black people shouldn't have to pay taxes, it's kind of an ignorant statement. It doesn't make any sense because, frankly, one of the things that I just heard in an Elon Musk short video at one point, he was in some sort of interview. I don't know the context of the interview, but he was making the point that everybody has a history of slavery. It's just a question of when you go back far enough, and every one of us have families that were slaves to somebody. Which, I mean, I don't know. I don't know how completely accurate that statement is, but he brings up a fair point, right? So at what point is there have been atrocities committed? Forget about the color of skin. There have been atrocities committed against every kind of nation, tribe, tongue sort of a thing in the past at some point. So where does that end, right? But let's keep going.
So that nobody gotta get no checks out of account. Just don't make us pay.
And when people struggle with this concept, because let's be real, we all have white friends.
Yeah.
We all are involved in circles of
influence of.
So the man talking right now on the right hand side of the screen is Lecrae. He's a Christian rap artist.
influence.
Yes, of different white friends, and it's interesting because we get to have these conversations that people don't get to have publicly. So the internet is like shaking fingers, and we are sitting down across the table like having these conversations on a regular basis.
On
So
a boat, anywhere,
wherever.
Right.
So
right.
one of the things that I was just recently sharing with one of our friends is that my 4 times great grandfather, he was he owned 80 acres of land.
Oh, yeah.
80 acres. He was schemed against and said he owed $57, and they plotted against him because they was jealous of this land. Said he owed $57, created a case against him, and then lynched him.
Dang.
For $57. We lost all 80 acres of land in our family, and he was lynched for $87. His wife tried to go in hiding, and she ended up disappearing, which we learned later she was killed. So all of their children raised each other. You know what I'm saying? And so people then look at us and say, how can you demand reparations? I'm like, well, I mean, if you think about it, 80 acres of land was just taken from my family, and my 3 times great grandfather was just murdered.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? So it's like, bro, how do you, what do you want me to say?
Okay. So I'm not going to talk a lot about this. I get what he's saying. And I think there's room for discussion about the past and those kinds of things and how they've affected. But what you would be talking about, right? If you, so the scriptures do talk about repayment, right? I mean, they do. However, the scriptures never mention, if you're, so when the scriptures talk about retributive justice, and the books of the law predominantly is where you'll find that kind of thing. And when the scriptures talk about retributive justice, they talk about if a person does this to this person, well, then the person that did it owes this person something, right? So the idea of retributive justice is if someone steals your car, right? They owe you whatever damages took. If someone steals your car, nothing, no damage happened to it. They've stolen it. They were caught. They give it back, and no damages happen or anything like that. They owe you the gas money, right? They owe you if you missed a meeting and lost, I mean, they owe you. Retribution has to happen, right? You have to make it right. If the problem with what reparations talks about is you're talking about something that happened generations ago that there's really no tangible way to fix. There really just isn't. I mean, people have talked about attempts to do this. California talks about, maybe they've done it even. I don't know, but they've talked about several times giving everyone who is black a certain amount of money, which again doesn't take into account the history of each individual person. Was this person owned or family owned by slaveholders? Were they abused and misused and oppressed, or were they not? Right? Sometimes that, folks, doesn't have to do with the color of a person's skin. Lecrae, I think, this isn't a got you moment, but Lecrae is doing this all the while talking into a microphone that costs $400, right? And there are a few of them right there. And the clothes that he wears, I couldn't afford, right? So at some point you have to go, I mean, you particularly, maybe your family was juked, like probably every one of our families, that you would be hard pressed to find any kind of American family that hasn't been tricked or duped or abused in some way at some time in history. It probably doesn't even exist, right? But I think what they're talking about isn't feasible, and it's actually not biblical. if Lecrae himself had been wronged in this time by someone, that someone would owe him. That's the way that it's supposed to work. And frankly, our country doesn't even do that, because people who do this and do a crime, for instance, they might serve time for doing that crime, but that actually isn't even justice in the biblical sense. So if someone steals your car and wrecks it, your car is valued at, let's say, $14,000. Someone steals your car, wrecks it, it's gone, right? Actual justice would be, if that person has that kind of money, they pay it right back and get you the same kind of car, right? Or the same level of, they pay you the money back. If they can't pay you the money back, then they get put into forced labor or something and pay it off anyway. That's actual justice, that the thing that you lost, you can get paid back, right? Actual justice, biblical justice, is life for life in that sense, right? If you, and this goes back, we've talked about this before on the podcast, if you deliberately, intentionally get mad and murder someone, you have forfeited your life in that act. It's not a matter of 20 years to life or 40 years without parole or anything like that. Biblically, you should just forfeit your life. It should be capital punishment. That's what Scripture would dictate. Now there are different views on that, and again, I'm not here to harp on people and be frustrated about it or anything like that. But so I'm just going to move on, because that's a whole huge discussion. I should probably limit these to maybe 3 at a time per podcast. So there's this guy, Zach Lambert, who's I've actually just begun to scroll over a lot of the stuff that he posts, because he frustrates me a lot. But he's very progressive. He needs Christ, if I'm reading him right all the time. He says biblical marriage is between one man and one woman. No, it's not. He says biblical marriage is between one man, one woman, and that woman's slave, Abraham, Sarah, and Hagar. Biblical marriage is between one man and 2 sisters after he works 7 years for each one of them. So he's going to talk about Jacob and Leah and Rachel. So you get where he's going with that. And of course, that his statements are stupid. Of course, they're illiterate and ludicrous. Just because something, this is an issue with slavery that you see in the Bible, with in this case, polygamy, other things like this, right? A lot of times people will make this mistake and say, well, this is in the Bible, so that means that God condones this. Well, that's not true at all. Just because something is in the Bible, and just because God doesn't burn someone alive right at the moment, doesn't mean that God thinks it's awesome, or that that's how God planned that's how God intended the norm to be, right? The norm is God made Adam and Eve, and not Adam, Eve, and Eva, right? That's not how it worked. God made Adam and Eve, one man, one woman. Jesus reaffirmed this in Mark chapter 10 and other places, that marriage is between one man and one woman, that there are only those 2 genders, right? Like this is a complete ignorant statement and a misuse of Scripture. He's saying that because there are examples of this happening, that God condones it and it should be normative. Dumb. Okay, this is what I actually wanted to talk about. So this North Dakota Family Alliance, again, they have lots of good things to say. I just started following them on X here on purpose, just to kind of look at it a little bit. They say every human, regardless of its stage of life, is equally valuable and worthy of protection. Couldn't agree more. This is You've heard me talk about this over and over and over and over and over again. Okay. Says there is no morally significant difference between a human embryo and newborn. Again, completely agree. Life begins at conception. So the moment sperm meets egg, boom, this is happening. That is a life, right? That is a life with equal value to anyone who is going to hear this podcast. Every beating heart is a beating heart, and every embryo, every sperm that meets an egg or whatever, that's a life that is the same as someone that's out of the womb. But okay, here's the email that I received earlier today. And it just, so I don't do this to attack them, but just to kind of talk about inconsistency a little bit. And first of all, I completely, I get why this is such a difficult thing to think about and talk about. But so it says, this is their statement, the North Dakota Family Alliance. This is their statement on criminalization of women who have abortions. Okay. So already this is a difficult thing, and people are bracing, right? Or whatever. It says this: recent public policy discussions in North Dakota have focused on the criminalization of women who have abortions. This is a difficult issue, with principled opinions on both sides of the topic. However, North Dakota Family Alliance does not support measures that seek to criminalize or punish these women, and we oppose including such penalties in legislation. So this is actually an example of one of the things that we've talked about before, and that is that the pro-life movement is actually the tends to be the main bit of the main adversary of equal protection rights for the unborn, and this is why, right? So they say this: as a Christian organization, NDFA believes in protecting life at all stages. We also believe that the mother is often the abortion's second victim. Similar to women who are victims of human trafficking, we believe the focus should be on punishing the source of the criminal activity, in this case, the abortionists who profit from killing innocent children by providing abortion drugs, and not the women who suffer because of it. Okay, so this is I get why they arrived at this, okay, but it's really not consistent, and I don't think there's any abolitionist like myself. There's kind of a misconception that what abolitionists want and what they want to fight for, or maybe that's not their motive, but what would come of their abolition laws is that women who've been coerced and abused would now be imprisoned for having an abortion. But that's not accurate. That's not an accurate way to look at it. When it says we also believe that the mother is often the abortion's second victim, I actually don't disagree to a degree with that statement. That happens, and it happens often, right? In our world, most women have frankly grown up in this world and have heard those kind of messages, and that's all that they know. There still are women out there, believe it or not, who are so ignorant because of the society in which they live, who have been so brainwashed into thinking that still this is just a clump of cells, right? I mean, that still exists. There are women who have been brainwashed into believing wholeheartedly that this is not really viable, that this is not a child until he or she is born, right? So like there are women, God help us, who have parents or boyfriends or whatever who pressure and coerce and abuse them essentially into making this decision to have an abortion. And here's what abolitionists don't believe. No abolitionist would say that in the event that the mother is the abortion's second victim, in the event that this is a victim, no one is saying, well, then murder in the first degree. What we are saying is that's actually not justice for the child, right? Justice for the child is to just look at it as if murder equals murder, right? If they believe that there is morally no significant difference between a human embryo and newborn, okay? If they believe every human, regardless of its stage in life, is equally valuable and worthy of protection, okay? If they believe that, then it's inconsistent to not simply say, okay, the law for murder just stands. And maybe the only change that we need is to put in there and make sure that there's a phrase in there somewhere in the legal system that says that human life begins at conception, right? So now that child has equal protection under the law, and only then. So right now, if a person, the thing that I've used in previous podcasts, because I think it's just a helpful example to visualize, is if a person is coerced into driving the getaway car for a bank robbery, if they're coerced and pressured and at gunpoint, and they're afraid if they don't, something's going to happen to them, they participated in it. They might have held a gun and helped rob the bank. But if they can prove that, like if this is a coercion thing, if you were forced into this at fear of your life kind of a thing, you're not going to be punished. You're not going to go to prison as the getaway driver if you were forced to do it. And that's the idea, right? So if the mother in a particular instance is the abortion's second victim, then she needs help. Then she needs counseling. Then she needs love and affection and all the help that she can get to move forward past that. If, however, and we could find many, many videos of young ladies on college campuses and all over the place. There are so many videos like this that I'm not even going to look it up. But many, many, many videos of women who just don't give a crap, who are all over colleges, and young women who are all over colleges and even in high schools or whatever at this point in history, who are just, convinced I have my sexual rights. I have rights to do what I want when I want. I've even seen videos of I think it was Apologia, Jeff Durbin and some pals talking to a person in their abortion situation, and they were, let's see. Yeah, I'm not gonna. Anyway, where they were talking to somebody and don't you realize that this is a human life kind of a thing, and the person is like, yeah, and I don't care, right? If I want to kill that SH, then I'm going to kill that SH. It doesn't matter, right? If that young woman has an abortion, she deserves to be tried for murder. Like, and there's no room for that. That's where the injustice of, in that sense, yes, the abortionist should go to prison. In fact, the abortionist committed the murder. So biblically, they forfeit their own life. In that instance, the mother who has that kind of attitude and is thinking like that and understands what she's doing and just doesn't give a crap, she's committed murder. She's an accomplice to murder. And here's the thing, Oregon just repassed laws to criminalize drug use and drug trafficking and stuff like that. You know why? Because whenever it was legal, and they went soft on it, and they were just trying to, let's just use this money to have programs to help people quit drugs. You know what happened? Nobody quit, and it became crazy rampant through the streets. Drug use was on every corner. It became unsafe for all the normal people who aren't dealing with that. And so what did they do? It only took a couple of years for one of the most morally bankrupt states in our nation to all of a sudden reenact laws to criminalize. So point being nice about it actually doesn't help anyone. These young women need to know that it's murder. They need to know that. And the heart behind it is not that, the heart behind it is not that we need to just throw every young woman who's ever had an abortion in prison. That's not the heart behind it, right? But you have to look at it from the standpoint of the one who is the most vulnerable first, which is the infant, the child involved. And until that child is given equal protection under the law, it is not being treated with the same level of value as anyone outside of the womb. That's just the logical fact of the matter. Does this mean that you might have to make some clear laws or to clarify some laws to come up with, as a legislature, to come up with, okay, well, what does coercion look like then? What does it mean that a woman is coerced into this? Like you might have to get a little bit intricate, right, to lay that out. But until the unborn has equal protection under the law, it doesn't matter how pro-life you are. At the end of the day, they're not equally protected. When you kill them, it's not murder. Just period. We did an abortion video a while back, Tanner and Marshall and I, and in that we looked at some of the North Dakota language in the law, and it's so ridiculous. It's like you read all of these things. Oh, they're against the law. You can't distribute these pills. You can't perform an abortion. You can't da-da-da-da. Great, wonderful. If you break this law, it's like a misdemeanor or something. It's ridiculous. It's like, no, you've taken a life or you haven't. Right? Like there really isn't any gray area. You have either committed a murder or you haven't. So I don't know. Anyway, I'm gonna go ahead and end it here. But I don't automatically assume that like you're not a Christian or something if you don't agree with me on this. I think that it really isn't as complicated legally. At least the first step isn't as complicated as we make it sometimes, because there are already laws on the books for protections against like coercion and things like that. If you helped and aided in a murder, and it was for fear of your own safety or your own life or whatever, and you were coerced, and now you've suffered trauma. Because like you're not gonna go to prison for that, right? Like that's the point of some of these laws. So that's the that's the idea behind the abolitionist view. There's more to this article from a biblical standpoint. The issues about balancing justice with mercy. They give some biblical. I haven't looked at all of those things yet. But I understand why people come to this conclusion. I don't like split with people for coming to the conclusion that they've come to. I just think that it's kind of inconsistent, and frankly, until young ladies have to fear and parents who might pressure them have to fear jail time or whatever. Like until it's actually treated as murder, it will just continue. That's just a fact of the matter. But the real the real war, as we've been talking about at church lately, is a spiritual one. And so if you want to abolish abortion and actually get rid of it, at the end of the day, legislature is great, and I will fight for it, and I will write to people and plead with them and engage in conversation about these things. But the only thing that's actually going to end it is heart change and the gospel of Christ. And so that's the first line of defense, the first line of attack. It's the first thing that we must do as Christians, is preach and proclaim the gospel of Christ. So until next time, go do that.